in the harsh winter of 1847, across the endless plains of Texas, two worlds collided in ways that would forever change the course of one man's life. This is not a tale of magic or miracles, but of something far more powerful: the unbreakable bonds of blood, the weight of buried memories, and the courage it takes to choose who you truly are when everything you've been taught tells you to be someone else. Meet Eli Red Hawk, a man caught between two identities, two peoples, two ways of life. Raised by those who taught him to despise his own heritage, he became a weapon turned against his own blood. But on one snow-covered morning, when duty demanded he walk away from a dying woman, something ancient stirred within him, something that would force him to confront not just his orders, but his very soul. What happens when the heart remembers what the mind was forced to forget? What price must a man pay to reclaim the truth of who he really is? And can love truly conquer the deepest wounds of betrayal and loss? This is that story. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The February wind cut through the Texas plains like a blade, carrying with it the metallic scent of snow and something else, something that made Eli Red Hawk's trained senses sharpen to a deadly point. Smoke, blood, the aftermath of violence. He rode his black stallion, Thunder, across the frozen landscape, his pale eyes scanning the horizon with the methodical precision of a man who had learned early that survival meant seeing everything and trusting nothing. At 28, Eli had spent more years as a scout for the Texas Rangers than he cared to count, his Comanche features hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, his heritage buried so deep that sometimes he almost forgot it existed. Almost. Colonel Morrison's orders echoed in his mind as he approached the site of yesterday's raid. Track them, Red Hawk. Find any survivors, and finish what needs finishing. We can't have witnesses spreading word about our methods. The settlement came into view, what was left of it. Burned wagons scattered across the snow like broken bones, their contents spilled and trampled. The Rangers had been thorough, as they always were when dealing with Comanche raiders. Eli dismounted, his boots crunching through the frost-hardened ground as he began his methodical search. This was his job. This was what 20 years of careful training had prepared him for. To be invisible, efficient, emotionless. To serve the people who had saved him from a savage life and molded him into something useful. But as he moved through the debris, something nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't name, like a half-remembered dream trying to surface. The way the wagons were arranged, the patterns in the snow, a soft sound stopped him cold, so quiet he almost missed it, a whisper of breath, barely audible above the wind. He followed the sound to a cluster of snow-covered rocks near what had been the lead wagon. There, partially hidden beneath a blood-stained buffalo hide, lay a young Comanche woman. Her long black hair was matted with blood, her traditional dress torn and frozen. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, and she was dying. Eli's hand moved instinctively to his Colt revolver. Orders were orders. No survivors meant no survivors. But as he drew closer, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Dark eyes, so familiar they made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't identify. She looked at him without fear, which surprised him. Most people, white or Comanche, looked at him with some mixture of suspicion and unease, never quite sure which side he truly belonged to. Taikuu, she whispered in Comanche, the word floating between them like a prayer. Brother. The language hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken with such tenderness in 20 years. His foster father, Samuel Harrison, had beaten the heathen tongue out of him when he was 8, but apparently not completely. The woman's voice carried something that made his carefully constructed walls shiver. "You're hurt," he said in English, his voice rougher than intended. She smiled weakly, and that smile, God help him, that smile reminded him of something. Someone, a face he'd been trained to forget, a voice he'd learned to silence in his dreams. "You have our blood," she said in broken English, studying his face with those impossibly familiar eyes. "But you wear their clothes, their hate." Eli's jaw tightened. "I wear nothing that isn't mine by right." "Tape Soratoya," she whispered, and the words went through him like lightning. "Where are your people?" He knew he should pull the trigger, should follow orders as he always had. Samuel Harrison and Colonel Morrison had given him purpose, direction, a place in a world that would otherwise have no use for someone like him. He owed them everything, but instead, he found himself kneeling in the snow, pulling off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shivering form. "What's your name?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. "Aiyana," she breathed. "It means eternal blossom." Something twisted in his chest at the name. Aiyana. Why did that feel like coming home? As he lifted her carefully in his arms, she began to hum something under her breath. A lullaby, soft and haunting, in the Comanche tongue. The melody wrapped around his heart like a familiar embrace, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, listening to his mother's voice in the firelight, feeling safe and loved and whole. The memory hit him, so hard he almost dropped her. "Nuku," Aiyana whispered, her hand touching his face with surprising strength. "My brother." "I'm not your brother," he said sharply, but even as he said it, the words felt like lies. "Blood knows blood," she replied simply. Eli carried her through the snow toward his horse, his mind racing. This was insane. He was risking everything, his position, his life, maybe even the lives of the people who had raised him. For what? For a dying Comanche woman who looked at him like she knew secrets he'd forgotten about himself. But as Thunder's hooves carried them away from the massacre site, Aiyana's lullaby continued, soft and persistent, awakening memories he'd thought were dead forever. And for the first time in 20 years, Eli Red Hawk began to wonder if the man he'd become was the man he was meant to be. The abandoned trapper's cabin sat nestled in a grove of bare cottonwoods, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Eli had discovered it years ago during a particularly brutal winter patrol, and he'd kept its location to himself, a habit that was now proving invaluable. Inside, he worked by lamplight to tend Aiyana's wounds while a fierce storm raged beyond the walls. She'd lost a lot of blood, and the bullet in her shoulder needed to come out, but she was stronger than she looked. As he cleaned the wound with whiskey and prepared his knife, she watched him with those steady dark eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "You have gentle hands," she observed quietly. "Not the hands of a killer." "You don't know what kind of hands I have," Eli replied, but there was less bite in his voice than before. "My grandmother always said you could tell a man's heart by how he touched the wounded. Your heart is not hard, despite what they taught you." Eli paused in his work. "What do you know about what I was taught?" Aiyana studied his face in the flickering lamplight. "I know you were taken. I know they tried to make you forget. But some things—" She touched her chest gently. "Some things live too deep to kill." As he worked to extract the bullet, she began to speak softly in Comanche, then translated for him. Stories of her people, their traditions, the way children were raised to understand their place in the great circle of life. Despite himself, Eli found the words strangely comforting. "Tell me about your family," he said, surprising himself with the question. Her eyes grew distant. "My father was killed 3 winters ago. Soldiers came to our winter camp, said we were harboring raiders." She paused. "My mother died of grief the following spring. My brother—" Her voice broke slightly. "My brother was taken when I was very small. I barely remember him, but my mother never stopped looking." Something cold settled in Eli's stomach. "Taken. Raiders. White men. They took several children that night. My mother said my brother fought like a wildcat, even though he was barely 8 summers old. She said he had a birthmark on his shoulder, shaped like a thundercloud." Eli's hand stilled. Without thinking, his right hand moved to his left shoulder, where beneath his shirt lay a dark birthmark he'd carried all his life. The mark Samuel Harrison had told him was a sign of the devil, something to be ashamed of and keep hidden. "What?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "What was your brother's name?" Aiyana's eyes filled with tears. "Tokala. It means fox. But my mother, she had a special name for him. She called him her little thunder spirit because of the mark he bore and the way he could move so quietly through the grass." The room seemed to spin around Eli. Memories crashed over him like a dam breaking. A woman's voice calling Tokala across a campfire. Gentle hands tracing the mark on his shoulder while telling him it made him special. The smell of sage and sweetgrass. The feeling of belonging somewhere, to someone. No, he whispered, backing away from Aiyana. No, that's not. I'm not. But Aiyana was sitting up now despite her wounds, her eyes wide with recognition and wonder. Show me, she said softly. Show me your shoulder. With shaking hands, Eli pulled down his shirt collar, revealing the dark birthmark that had been his secret shame for 20 years. Aiyana gasped, tears streaming down her face. Tokala, she breathed. My brother. My lost brother. The name hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, running through tall grass, while a woman's voice called after him, laughing. He was sitting by a fire listening to stories of great warriors and wise spirits. He was being held and loved and told that he was precious, that he belonged to a people who would always claim him as their own. They told me my parents were dead, he said, his voice breaking. They told me I was nothing before they saved me, that my people were savages who would have let me die. Our mother never stopped believing you were alive, Aiyana said, reaching for his hand. Even when the others said it was hopeless, she kept your name alive in our lodge. She taught me your baby songs, made me promise to remember your face even though I was so small when you were taken. Eli pulled his hand away, pacing to the small window where snow swirled in the darkness. 20 years, he said bitterly. 20 years I've been their weapon. Do you know what I've done? The raids I've tracked, the people I've helped hunt down? My own people. But you saved me, Aiyana said gently. When you could have followed orders, when it would have been easier to walk away, you chose to remember who you really are. I don't know who I really am anymore, Eli admitted, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. I'm not the child who was taken, but I'm not really the man they made me into either. I exist somewhere in between, belonging to no one. You belong to our blood, Aiyana said with quiet certainty. You belong to the memory of our mother, who never gave up hope. You belong to the truth that lives in your heart, no matter what lies they filled your head with. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small cabin, something had shifted. Two people who had been strangers an hour ago now sat with the weight of a shared past between them, and the terrible knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. What happens now? Eli asked, still staring out into the storm. Now, Aiyana said, you choose. The man they made you, or the man you were born to be. But Tokala. She used his true name with such love that it made his chest ache. Remember that some choices can't be undone, and some loyalties, once broken, can never be mended. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of hoofbeats cut through the storm. Someone was coming, and Eli had a terrible feeling he knew exactly who it was. The hoofbeats grew louder despite the howling wind, and through the cabin's frosted window, Eli could see the flickering glow of torches cutting through the darkness. His blood turned to ice as he recognized the lead rider's silhouette, Colonel Morrison. And he wasn't alone. They found us, Eli said grimly, checking his weapons with the automatic efficiency of 20 years' training. Aiyana struggled to sit up, her face pale but determined. How many? 6, maybe 7. He looked at her critically. Can you ride? I can do what I have to do. Before Eli could respond, Morrison's voice boomed across the clearing. Red Hawk, I know you're in there. Come out, and we can discuss your temporary lapse in judgment. Eli moved to the window, staying in the shadows. Morrison sat his horse like a conquering general, flanked by 5 other rangers, all armed, all loyal to a fault. Men who had fought beside Eli for years, who trusted him as a brother. You have 30 seconds to come out with your hands visible, Morrison continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. After that, we come in after you. Taikuu, Aiyana whispered, using the Comanche word for brother. You can still walk away from this. Tell them I was already dead when you found me. Eli looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had been a stranger hours ago, but who carried his blood, his history, his true name, the sister he'd thought was lost forever. No, he said quietly. I've spent 20 years walking away from who I am. I won't do it anymore. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Outside, Morrison was growing impatient. 15 seconds, Red Hawk. Eli opened the door and stepped into the swirling snow, his hands clearly visible but ready to move. The Rangers had their weapons drawn, but not directly aimed yet. "Colonel," he said evenly. Morrison's weathered face was stone-hard in the torchlight. This man had been more than a commanding officer to Eli. He'd been a mentor, a father figure, who had shaped him into the weapon he'd become. "Stand down, son," Morrison said, his voice carrying decades of authority. "Whatever spell that savage has cast on you, it's not too late to break it." "She's not a savage," Eli replied carefully. "She's a wounded woman who needs medical attention. She's a Comanche warrior who participated in raids against innocent settlers," Morrison snapped. "And she's a witness to operations that could compromise years of careful work. You know the protocol." Behind Morrison, Sergeant Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Eli had saved Hayes' life twice, and the man's expression suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. "Tom," Eli said, addressing Hayes directly, "you have a sister back in San Antonio. If she were lying wounded and helpless, would you want someone to show her mercy or follow protocol?" Hayes' jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Morrison's patience snapped. "Enough. Red Hawk, you've served with distinction for 15 years. Don't throw it all away for some misguided sentiment about shared blood. These people aren't your family, we are." "Are we?" Eli asked quietly. "Because family doesn't ask you to murder wounded women. Family doesn't teach you to hate the very blood that flows in your veins. That blood has brought you nothing but misery." Morrison exploded. "Samuel Harrison saved you from a life of barbarism and ignorance. We gave you purpose, education, a place in civilized society. And this is how you repay that kindness." From inside the cabin, Aiyana's voice rose in a traditional Comanche death song, hauntingly beautiful even through the wind. The sound seemed to affect some of the Rangers, their horses shifting nervously. "Listen to that," Morrison said with disgust. "Heathen noise. Is that what you want to go back to? Living like an animal, worshipping rocks and sky spirits?" But the song stirred something deep in Eli's chest, memories of ceremonies around sacred fires, of stories that connected all living things, of a spiritual richness that the rigid churches of his adopted culture had never been able to match. "Maybe," he said simply. Morrison's face darkened. "I see. The savage has awakened, has it? Well then, let me remind you of your duties." He gestured to the other Rangers. "These men have families, Red Hawk, wives and children who depend on our work to keep them safe. That woman in there has blood on her hands. How many settlers has she helped kill? How many children has she helped steal? How many children have we helped steal?" Eli shot back, and several Rangers flinched. "How many communities have we destroyed in the name of progress and civilization?" "We do what's necessary to build something better," Morrison said coldly. "Sometimes that requires hard choices, like turning a stolen child against his own people." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's hand moved to his weapon. "You're out of line, Red Hawk. Stand aside and let us finish this." "No." That single word changed everything. Suddenly weapons were raised, torches flickered more ominously, and the space between loyalty and betrayal became a chasm no one could cross. "I gave you everything," Morrison said, his voice heavy with disappointment and rage. "I made you into something more than you ever could have been on your own." "You made me into someone I never should have become," Eli replied, "and I'm done being that person." Behind him, the cabin door opened slightly, and Aiyana appeared, leaning heavily against the frame, but standing proud despite her wounds. "Nuku," she called softly to Eli. "My brother. Whatever happens, I'm proud to die beside you." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "How touching. The family reunion. Well, if you insist on dying with the savage, Red Hawk, I won't deny you that privilege." He raised his weapon, and Eli knew that 20 years of his life had led to this moment. The choice between the man he'd been made into and the man he was born to be. Between loyalty to those who had shaped him and loyalty to the blood that called him home. The storm howled around them, and in that howling, Eli heard the voices of ancestors he'd never been allowed to know, calling him to remember who he really was. His hand moved to his gun, and the die was cast. The first shot shattered the night like thunder. Eli drew and fired in one fluid motion, 20 years of training taking over even as his heart screamed against what he was doing. Morrison spun from his saddle, clutching his shoulder, more shocked than hurt. "Take him down!" the colonel roared, and suddenly the clearing erupted in gunfire. Eli dove behind a fallen log, bullets splintering the wood around him. Behind him, Aiyana had somehow produced a knife and stood ready despite her wounds, her eyes fierce with the warrior spirit that no amount of suffering could break. Sergeant Hayes hesitated, his weapon raised but not firing. "Eli," he called, "for God's sake, think about what you're doing." "I am thinking, Tom," Eli shouted back, reloading quickly. "For the first time in 20 years, I'm thinking clearly." Another ranger, young Miller, tried to flank around the cabin. Eli put a bullet in the ground near his feet, sending him scrambling back to cover. "I don't want to kill any of you," Eli called out, "but I won't let you hurt her. She's just one savage." Morrison spat, pressing a bandana to his wounded shoulder. "Is she worth dying for?" Eli looked back at Aiyana, this sister he'd just found, this connection to a past he'd been forced to forget. In her eyes, he saw not just his own reflection, but the faces of parents who had loved him, a culture that had shaped his earliest years, a heritage that was his birthright regardless of who had tried to steal it. "Yes," he said simply. "She is." The battle continued, but Eli noticed something changing. Hayes wasn't shooting to kill, and neither was Miller. Even Corporal Johnson seemed to be aiming high. These men had fought beside him, trusted him, respected him. The bonds forged in battle weren't easily broken, even by orders. Morrison noticed too. "What's wrong with you men?" he bellowed. "He's a traitor, a savage sympathizer." "He's our friend," Hayes said quietly, lowering his weapon. "And this feels wrong, Colonel." "Wrong." Morrison's face was purple with rage. "I'll tell you what's wrong. 20 years of careful work, undone by misplaced sentiment. 20 years of building trust and cooperation with the settlers, destroyed by one man's reversion to barbarism." A new sound cut through the night. More hoofbeats, approaching fast from the east. Eli's heart sank, thinking Morrison had brought reinforcements. But as the riders emerged from the storm, he realized these weren't rangers. They were Comanche warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. Leading them was a man Eli didn't recognize, but whose bearing marked him as a chief or war leader. The new arrivals quickly surrounded the rangers, who found themselves outnumbered 2-1. Morrison cursed violently, but even he was smart enough not to start a fight they couldn't win. The Comanche leader rode forward, his eyes moving between Eli and Aiyana. When he spoke, it was in perfect English. "I am Chief Gray Wolf," he said formally. "We heard gunfire and came to investigate." His gaze settled on Aiyana. "My daughter, are you harmed?" "Father," Aiyana breathed, relief and joy flooding her voice. Gray Wolf's eyes then moved to Eli, studying his face intently. After a long moment, recognition dawned. "Tokala," he said softly. "Little Thunder Spirit, you have grown." Another memory surfaced, this man younger, teaching a small boy to track animals, to read the signs of weather and season. A man who had been like an uncle to him, who had grieved when he was taken. "Gray Wolf," Eli said in halting Comanche, the words feeling strange but right on his tongue. "You remember me." "A father remembers all his children," Gray Wolf replied, "even those stolen from him." Morrison struggled to his feet, supported by Hayes. "This is American territory," he said defiantly. "You have no authority here." Gray Wolf's smile was cold as winter wind. "This is Comanche land, as it has always been. Your papers and your flags do not change the truth written in earth and sky." "The treaties. Your people break treaties like twigs," Gray Wolf cut him off. "But this is not about treaties. This is about family." He looked at Eli again. "The question is, Thunder Spirit, where do you choose to stand?" Eli looked around the clearing, at the rangers who had been his brothers in arms, at Morrison who had been his commanding officer and reluctant father figure, at Aiyana, who carried his blood and his true history, at Gray Wolf, who represented a world he'd been forced to forget. I stand with my blood, he said finally, the words carrying across the clearing like a verdict. Hayes nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing else. Miller looked sad but understanding. Even Johnson seemed to accept the decision with weary resignation. Only Morrison looked betrayed. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said bitterly. "No," Eli replied, moving to help Aiyana stand. "The biggest mistake of my life was believing that I could be someone other than who I was born to be." Grey Wolf gestured to his warriors, who began to withdraw, covering the retreat. "Come, Thunder Spirit, come home." As they rode away into the storm, Eli looked back once at the Rangers. Hayes raised his hand in a small salute, a farewell between former brothers in arms. It was both an ending and a beginning. "Will you regret it?" Aiyana asked softly as they rode. Eli considered the question carefully. He was leaving behind everything he'd known for 20 years, his identity, his purpose, his place in the world. But as they rode deeper into Comanche territory, as familiar landscapes awakened long-buried memories, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. He felt like he was going home. "No," he said finally. "I won't regret choosing truth over lies, family over duty to those who stole me from my family in the first place." The storm began to clear as dawn approached, and in the distance, smoke rose from the campfires of the Comanche winter settlement. As they rode toward it, Aiyana began to sing, not a death song this time, but a song of homecoming, of the return of the lost. And for the first time since he was 8 years old, Eli Red Hawk, Tokala, Thunder Spirit, sang along in the language of his birth, his voice joining with his sisters in a harmony that felt like healing, like redemption, like coming home. Behind them, the old life faded into memory. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges, the difficult work of rebuilding an identity that had been buried for 2 decades. But as the sun broke through the clouds and painted the snow-covered plains in gold, Eli knew he had made the only choice his heart could live with. He had chosen to remember who he was. He had chosen to come home. 6 months later, in the Comanche summer camp along the Llano River, a man sat teaching young warriors the art of tracking. His students called him Thunder Spirit, though some of the older people still remembered him as the little boy who had vanished one terrible night 20 years ago. Eli had found his place among his people, though the adjustment hadn't been easy. Learning to live by Comanche ways after 20 years in white society required patience from everyone involved. But Aiyana had been there every step of the way, helping him remember their language, their customs, their connection to the land and sky. He'd also become something of a bridge between worlds. His knowledge of ranger tactics and settler ways proved invaluable in protecting the tribe, while his rediscovered Comanche wisdom helped him find peace with his past. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered about the Rangers. Hayes had sent word through intermediaries that Morrison had been reassigned, that the colonel's methods were being questioned by higher authorities. The message also included an invitation, if Eli ever wanted to return, to find some middle path between his 2 worlds. The door wasn't entirely closed. But as he watched his nephew, Aiyana's son, practice the skills that had been passed down through generations of their people, Eli knew he was exactly where he belonged. The blood that called him home had been stronger than 20 years of lies, stronger than loyalty to those who had stolen his childhood, stronger than fear of an uncertain future. He had found his way back to himself, and in doing so, he had found something precious that could never be taken away again, the unbreakable bonds of family, heritage, and truth. In the distance, Aiyana's voice rose in an evening song, carried on the warm summer wind, and Eli smiled as he joined his voice with hers, their harmony a testament to the power of blood, love, and the courage to choose who you truly are. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.